Okay, welcome everyone to a new episode of Technique Tuesday. This week we're going to be looking at how to perform the upright row with perfect technique while avoiding injury and preventing shoulder pain. And we're also going to be looking at a few creative alternatives. Now, in my opinion, the upright row is actually a pretty fantastic exercise if performed properly, because it may be the only multi-joint compound movement that heavily targets the lateral deltoid, not the front deltoid, like a shoulder press or a bench press would. So before we get into the technique itself, let's have a quick look at the muscles involved first. So with the upright row, we're going to be hitting the lateral delts through shoulder abduction, basically bringing your arm out to the side like in a lateral raise. And we'll also hit the upper traps through some degree of scapular elevation, so basically shrugging your shoulders up. And the biceps will also be involved as they perform elbow flexion. However, the elbow flexion range of motion is pretty small, so we're going to think about the upright row as a shoulder and trap exercise. But I think that if we modify the exercise properly, we can make it even more shoulder dominant, since I think you'll be able to overload the upper traps better through one of the shrug variations we discussed in the Trap Technique Tuesday video. So first things first, I want to address the potential shoulder health concerns with the upright row, since according to one 2011 NSCA report, 36% of weight training injuries occur at the shoulder complex. And since the upright row is thought to have a fairly high risk profile because of its potential for subacromial impingement, I think it's important to consider 3 simple modifications to avoid pain and prevent injury. So impingement is basically what happens when the space within the shoulder joint is constricted, causing the bones of the joint to jam up against the muscles or tendons of the rotator cuff, which can then lead to inflammation and pain. Now, one way to cause shoulder impingement is to raise your arm up above shoulder height in an internally rotated position. So if you have healthy shoulders, you can try this. So basically, you can internally rotate your shoulders and then lift your arms up, and there'll come a point where you'll start to feel tightness in your shoulders, which is probably where the impingement starts. However, despite the fact that the upright row does involve elevating the shoulder in a more internally rotated position, according to the NSCA report, upright rows can still be safe and effective, provided proper lifting precautions are followed. So first, you want to keep the bar in close to your body, which is going to help keep tension on the lateral deltoid and keep elevation of the arm more in the scapular plane. Second, you should think about pulling through the elbows rather than with the wrist. Another way I like to cue for this is to think about rowing out and up, not just straight up, which is also going to prevent the traps from taking over by emphasizing shoulder abduction over scapular elevation. And third, since most studies do show impingement between 70 to 120 degrees of elevation, these authors recommend keeping elevation just below 90 degrees or below shoulder height. So in other words, you should end the range of motion once your arms are parallel to the floor, or you can think about ending the lift once your elbows reach shoulder height. Now, with all that said, clearly there are individual differences in structure and mobility, so it doesn't necessarily mean you're definitely going to get injured if you don't make these modifications. However, I think this is what's really going to keep the shoulder safest for most people. And I think another modification worth making, just for the sake of optimizing muscle activation, is to take a slightly wider grip. A 2013 study by McAllister et al. Found that a wide grip led to more EMG activation of the lateral delt than a shoulder width grip or a close grip. But still, because everyone's skeleton is different, you're going to want to figure out what grip is most comfortable to you without going too close or too wide, with the sweet spot being usually around 1 to 1.5 times shoulder width for most people. Now, another thing that I love about the upright row is that there are so many effective variations. Now, my personal favorite is the standing rope upright row, since it allows for more freedom at the shoulder joint than the barbell, and you can use the cue to pull the rope apart as you initiate the concentric, which is really going to turn on the side delts. So you want to grip the handles with a double overhand grip and stand with a stable stance just behind the cable. I find a staggered foot stance most stable here so I don't lose my balance, and rather than rolling straight up, I like to lean slightly back and then pull the rope up along the front of my torso. Once you reach the point where your elbows are in line with the shoulders or just above the shoulders, depending on what feels most comfortable for you, then you can reverse the motion, allowing the handles to move back down and in as you lower the weight down under control. Another spin on this is the lying rope upright row on a seated cable machine, and I like this option as well because it really locks you in, preventing cheating and shifting most of the tension onto the delts. I also really like the one-arm dumbbell upright row, where you can focus on isolating one shoulder at a time. With these, I'll brace myself up against the end of an incline bench with my non-lifting hand, lean slightly forward, and then lift the dumbbell out to the side. So it should feel very similar to how you'd initiate a dumbbell lateral raise, except you allow your elbow to bend, which is going to allow you to lift heavier weights. You can also switch up the resistance curve by using bands, which I'll do as part of my shoulder warm-up, or sometimes I'll add these at the end of a shoulder workout to really blast the side delts with higher reps. Also, because there's very little tension at the bottom here, I'll reverse the range of motion early, keeping constant tension on the delts. So for the most part, I recommend loading the upright row in a more moderate rep zone, something around 8 to 12 reps. Because it is a multi-joint compound movement, you can load it reasonably heavy. However, in my experience, when people try to load below 8 reps or so, they can't help but cheat as their lower back and hips get involved, and it becomes much harder to establish a solid mind-muscle connection with the side delts. So as long as your form doesn't deteriorate, there isn't anything necessarily wrong with using higher reps as a way to really burn out the shoulders at the end of a workout as well. So other than just going too heavy, I would say the most common error that I see on the upright row is bringing the elbows up too high. Even though I don't think this is going to put most people with healthy shoulders in the hospital right away, I do think it is contraindicated based on the scientific literature, and it should be avoided if you want to keep your rotator cuff safe and healthy over the long term. It's also really common to see people turn the upright row into some sort of weird front raise looking movement, which kind of defeats the purpose of the exercise, as this is just going to shift emphasis away from the lateral delt and onto the front delt, which is already getting plenty of work from any overhead pressing or horizontal pressing in your program. So you want to make sure you keep the barbell or rope in tight to your body. Try to lift in that scapular plane, lifting the arms out to the sides, similar to how you would in a lateral raise. So guys, that is all that I have on the upright row. I'd recommend watching my video on the overhead press. I really think that's probably the main bread and butter compound exercise for developing overall shoulder strength, and my lateral raise video, which is going to target the lateral delt but through an isolation movement. So you're probably going to want to include both of those in your routine. You can also check out jeffnippard.com for all my training programs, which always come with a list of coaching cues for every exercise in the program, and they have a detailed explanation of the biomechanics involved. So my fundamentals hypertrophy program comes with 3 separate 8-week training splits designed for anyone in their first couple years of lifting, and I'll have a link to that down below if you'd like to check it out. Don't forget to leave me a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you happen to be new, and I'll see you guys all here next Tuesday.